This is a review of adding and subtracting with negative numbers. I want you to think of a number line when you're adding and subtracting with negative numbers when you don't have a calculator. So remember, when you're subtracting, you go to the left, put you in negative territory. When you're adding, you go to the right. I also want you to always remember to keep the sign in front of the number with the number, and then you're always going to end up adding. So on these two, we have going to the left -7 and then coming back to the right 10. So I know that my answer is going to be a positive number. All right, let's learn some rules here. When we have the same sign, you are going to add and keep the sign. So looking at my first problem, I have -5 minus 29. If I keep the sign in front of the number, I've got -5 plus -29. Same signs, add and keep the sign. Well, the sign is negative, so my answer has to be negative because I'm going to go -5, and then I'm going to go some more into the negative, so I absolutely know my answer has to be negative. And then I'm just going to add the two numbers together. I'm actually going to show how I did that. I just stacked them up and added them longhand. So my answer has to be negative. Same signs, add and keep. Looking at the next problem, 4 plus 12, these are both positive numbers. So I know that my answer must be positive. So I'm just going to add the two numbers together and get a positive 16. Let's look at our next problem, -14 minus 9. Again, both of these numbers are negative, so I know that my answer has to be negative. So I am going to, same signs, add and keep that sign. When I add -14 and -9, I get -23. My next problem is 7 plus 8. They're both positive. I'm going to add them together. I get a positive 15. Same signs, add and keep the sign. This rule also works with decimals and fractions. So here my next problem is decimals. I'm -18.54 minus 25.12. They're both negative numbers, and so I know my answer must be negative. Now I'm just going to add the two numbers together. And when I do, I get -43.76. Same signs. If I have the same signs, I'm going to add the numbers and keep that sign. Always, always, always. Now, what if I have different signs? Well, different signs, we have this little saying that says, subtract, keep the sign of the bigger number. So let's look at our first number, or our first problem, 5 minus 29. If I'm keeping the sign in front of each number, I've got a +5 and a -29. Different signs, so I'm going to subtract those and keep the sign of the bigger number. Well, if I go to the right 5 and then I go back to a -29, I absolutely know my answer has to be negative. That's why I'm going to keep the sign of the bigger number. And then I'm just going to subtract those numbers, the smallest from the largest, and get an answer of -24. Different signs subtract. Keep the sign of the bigger number. Looking at my next problem, I have a -4 and a +12. My larger number is positive, so my answer is going to be positive because I'm going to go to the negative and then I'm going to go back to the positive. So I'm just going to add these two numbers, different sign, subtract. So I'm going to subtract these two numbers and keep the sign of the 12, which is positive. Looking at the next problem, -14 plus 9. My larger number is 14. It is negative, so my answer must be negative. And then, since they're different signs, I'm just going to subtract these two. Notice I always subtract the smaller number from the larger number, and I get a -5. Looking at my next problem, 7 minus 8. These are different signs, a positive and a negative. My 8 is negative, so I know that's my larger number. My answer is going to have to be negative. And then I'm just going to subtract 7 from 8, get 1. My answer has to be negative 1. Again, these rules also work with decimals and fractions. So here I have two decimal numbers, negative 18.54 and positive 25.12. My larger number is positive, so my answer is going to have to be positive. They're different signs, so I'm going to subtract these two numbers. And when I do, I'm going to get a positive 6.58. Now, I want you to spend some time looking at these problems and just telling me if they're going to be a positive answer or a negative answer. You can actually pause your video if you'd like to do that right now. Okay, looking at our first one, these are different signs. So remember, different signs, I'm going to keep the sign of my larger number, which is 18. It is positive, so my answer is going to be positive. Looking at my next problem, negative 2 minus 13. These are both negative numbers, and therefore, I'm going to keep the sign. If it's same signs, I'm going to keep that sign, so my answer has to be negative. Looking at my next problem, these are different signs. I have a positive 14 and a negative 39. If they're different signs, I keep the sign of the larger number, which is 39, so my answer must be negative. Looking at the next one, 17 and negative 12. These are different signs, and therefore I'm going to keep the sign of the larger number, which is 17, and it's positive, so my answer has to be positive. The last problem, I've got different signs, negative 12.5, positive 34.3. Different signs, I'm going to keep the sign of the larger number, which is 34.3. It's positive, so my answer is going to have to be positive. Now, let's go back and solve these. The first one, different signs subtract. So I'm just going to subtract 5 from 18. Already said it has to be positive. Positive 3. Sorry about that. That's my phone. Okay, sorry about that. Now, the next problem, we have two that are the same sign, so we're going to add. And when we do that, we get 15. We already said it's going to be a negative. My next one, we have different signs, so we're going to subtract. And we've already said it's going to be negative. The next problem, 17 minus 12, we could probably do that one in our head. And it's going to be positive 5. And then the last one, again, could be decimals, could be fractions, or could be whole numbers. These rules work for all of them. They're different signs, so we're going to subtract those, and we're going to get a positive 21.8. The real key here, the critical skill that you need to know for your life, is when you're looking at positive and negative numbers. You may not be able to immediately come up with the number, but you should be able to say, yeah, okay, it makes sense that my answer is going to be positive, or it makes sense that my answer is going to be negative. It's a number sense thing, and that is a life skill that you need to have. So it's good to practice. Okay, I think we're done here.